Everybody always says that scratch-made food is a lot better, so today we're going to put that to the test. I've got one burger made with homemade ground beef and another with store-bought ground beef. In today's video, we're going to make these burgers, try them out, and see which one is better. Let's start with our meat grind. So for this recipe, I'm going to be using 3 different cuts of beef. So we've got a nice beef chuck roast, a brisket flat, and a beef sirloin. So this is my first time grinding my own meat. And I was doing a little bit of research online, watching more YouTube videos. It's a good mix of lean and fatty meat and should be similar to like an 80-20 or a 70-30 store-bought ground, which means it's 80% or 70% lean to 20 or 30% fat. First up, we've got our sirloin. So as you can see, this is super lean, not a whole lot of fat. Next up, we've got our brisket flat, which is a good mix of lean meat and fat. And then finally, we've got the chuck roast, which again is a good mix of lean and fat. You can see all that intramuscular fat in there. Before I put this in the meat grinder, we have to cut these down into smaller pieces so everything fits. So all that I'm gonna do is just cut it into long strips. So about an inch wide or so. As I mentioned before, this is my first time using a meat grinder and grinding my own beef. So I want you guys to see kind of what you can expect at home if you were to do this yourself. Kind of the prep and the effort and time required. We're going to cut these into these bigger chunks. Next up, we've got the brisket flat. Go this way. And it's about 2 pounds of each. So altogether, we're looking at about 6 pounds. You can also do this with just one cut. You can just grind down a chuck roast, which would be similar to that 80-20, 70-30 mix. Mixing different cuts, you know, gives it a little different flavor profile. The sirloin has that nice beefy flavor, but it's kind of lean on its own. So that's where the chuck roast comes in with that extra fat. Brisket, of course, is nice, beefy, and delicious. But based on what I found out online and the research that I did, this seems like a good starting combo for burgers. So we've got the sirloin, the brisket flat. Next up, we've got our chuck roast. You can see the difference. Get all this intramuscular fat in the chuck roast. And then here's the sirloin where it's basically all lean. That extra fat is going to provide the juiciness and of course flavor in our ground and eventually in our burgers. Meat is cut up. I'm going to put this back on my tray. And I'm going to pop this in the freezer for about 20-30 minutes just to let it firm up a bit so it doesn't clog up the meat grinder, especially that today is super hot and humid out here. Firming this up will just make it easier to grind. So in the freezer this goes for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll grind it up. Next up, let's get the meat grinder ready. So this is from a company called Meat. This is their 1 horsepower grinder, and this thing is a beast. I'm gonna move it over here actually and kind of go over all the parts. So this part goes right up here. This is where our cubed beef is going to go in. And there's 2 different grinding plates depending how coarse you want your ground beef. So this is the 10mm one with these bigger holes. And I have the 5mm one in there right now for a little smaller and a finer grind, which I think should be fine for the burgers. But we're gonna see how it all comes out. All right. Beef is nice and firm, super cold. I'm gonna put this pan right underneath to catch our meat. I'm excited to do this. Like I said, I've never ground beef before, so just excited to see how this is all gonna turn out. Let's turn this guy on. There we go. And let's just drop it in. Oh, look at that. There he goes. That's cool. Man, this thing is doing its thing. It's very satisfying seeing this meat come out this end. Let's move this out here. All right, look at that. Man, that got done in no time. I think that is done. Let's shut this off. So the one thing with ground beef, especially when making burgers, is you don't want to work it too much because then it's going to get super tough and your burgers won't be as tender and juicy. But because we had 3 different cuts of meat in there, I'm just going to kind of loosely mix all this together. I'm not trying to shape it or form it. I'm just trying to combine it all together so there's kind of equal amounts of meat and fat everywhere. Plus, when I was dropping the cubes in the meat grinder, try to kind of alternate between the brisket and the sirloin and the chuck roast. I think this is looking really good. Well combined. You can see all the kind of pieces of fat. You can see the lean. I put the fresh ground meat in the refrigerator, so now let's take this thing apart and clean this up. So this front plate comes off. This is what holds everything together, just like that. There we go. Okay, so this is the 5mm plate that we used for this grind. And here is the auger. Got a little bit of meat, and then this is what cuts the meat in the grinder. There you go. I'm gonna bring all this inside, put it in the sink, and get it all cleaned up. All right, next up we can assemble our patties. So we've got our freshly ground meat and the store-bought 80/20 ground chuck, which is what I usually use when I make homemade burgers. So I'm gonna weigh these out into 6-ounce patties, so about a 1/3 pound burger should be fine. So let me just weigh these guys out. That way everything is even, accurate, a little bit less. Anytime you're shaping these by hand, like I said before, you don't want to overwork it because your burger is going to be tough. So just gently, just kind of form it into a patty. Look at that. Let's open the store-bought ground chuck. So you can see the store-bought ground beef, it's more of a strand rather than a crumble like our fresh ground. It's a similar size. These are also a pretty fine grind, so should be a similar burger. And again, same process as with our fresh ground, just kind of shape it without overworking it. So just like that. Next thing you want to do is take your hamburger buns and just place them over your raw patties just to get an idea for the size. You want to be sure that your meat sticks out past your bun because it's going to shrink as it cooks, so that way you get nice full coverage. And actually, now that I'm holding this bun over this patty, I think this is it's a little bit too much for our size burger bun. So I'm going to remove some of this and make it instead of a 6-ounce patty, let's try a 4-ounce patty. I think that might be better fitting for our buns. So let's remove a little bit of this meat here. Okay, there we go. Let's try this. So this is about 4.5 ounces. These burger buns are not too big, and I like a nice distribution of bun to burger to your toppings. Okay, so now when I take my bun, yeah, that's much better. I like that. All right, I've got my patties formed. So as you can see, we've got 4 patties. This is with the fresh ground. And you can see the color is much darker on this meat compared to the store-bought patties, but they are all the same size, about 4.5 ounces. So now it's time to season them up. Now, I didn't put any seasoning into the meat when I was grinding it or mixing it because we're making a burger, so kind of traditionally you just season it on the outside. So I'm going to go with my all-purpose barbecue rub first. So just a nice little sprinkle. So this is salt, pepper, garlic. And the next, and I saw this on another YouTube channel, you can do a little Worcestershire on the top of this as well, just to give it that extra sort of umami flavor. So we'll go with a couple dashes of Worcestershire on the top here. Spread this out a little bit. I'm gonna flip these guys over gently, and we'll repeat that on the other side. Okay, now before these hit the grill, I'm gonna put this whole tray in the fridge for a little bit. Again, let that beef firm up, and then it's also going to be less likely to crumble on the grill, especially this fresh ground meat. Next, let's prep a quick burger sauce. You can keep this as easy or as kind of complicated as you want. I'm just going to go with a little bit of ketchup, some yellow mustard, a little bit of mayo. I'm just kind of eyeballing this. I'm going 2 parts ketchup to 1 part mustard and mayo. You can adjust these ratios to your liking. And then I'm going to go with a splash of pickle juice and a little bit more of my all-purpose seasoning just to bring everything together. Mix this guy up. And our burger sauce is ready to go. I've got the patties out of the fridge. They have firmed up nicely. You can still see a clear difference between the fresh ground and the store-bought ground. Grill's fired up, set up for kind of medium high heat. I don't want to get it too hot because I don't want these to burn. So let's get these guys off our tray and we'll put them on. We're going to do the fresh ones on this side and the store-bought ones on this side. These are pretty thin, so they're going to cook super fast. I'm going to give these a flip after about 2 minutes. Once they're nicely kind of charred up on the bottom, then we'll add our cheese and finish them off. Let's give these guys a flip. It's been about 2 minutes or so. Ooh, look at that. Beautiful crust on the outside. Let's flip these guys. If you see that your burgers are getting maybe a little bit too toasty, and just move them over to the indirect side to finish. That's all that fat that's rendering out of the meat that's causing those flare-ups. So I've got a slice of American cheese because that is the best cheese for burgers. The last step is to toast up our buns. I'm just going to throw these over the hot side. Ooh, oh yeah, this one's looking really good. There we go. All right, everything is cooked. One thing I want to show you guys. So the store-bought ground beef shrunk much more than the fresh ground. They were roughly the same size when we started, but the store-bought ones are much smaller now. So let's assemble. We've got our toasted buns. I'm going to start with some burger sauce on the top and on the bottom here. Let me put the bottoms towards you so you can actually see a little bit better. First up, we've got some lettuce. I'm gonna keep it pretty simple with the toppings. I really just want to focus on the meat and just see what that's gonna taste like. We've got our freshly ground patty and the store-bought ground patty. Slice of tomato. Don't forget to season your tomatoes. Just gonna go with a little bit of salt, and our burgers are ready to go. Burgers are assembled, and honestly, they both look really good. Look at that. You get the toasted bun, the lettuce, our patty with cheese, burger sauce, the tomato. So the only thing left to do is to try them out. Let's go for the freshly ground beef first. I'm really excited about this burger. That is super flavorful. Right away, you can taste that kind of beefy flavor. Super juicy, nice and tender. Goes so well with that lettuce, the tomato, the burger sauce. I mean, that's a really good burger. Putting that Worcestershire sauce on the patty, highly recommend that. You can't really taste it, but it just kind of gives it that kind of something special. This is a really, really tasty burger. All right, next up, let's try the store-bought ground burger. Okay. Also a very, very tasty burger. You can still taste the meat. I mean, it is beefy. It doesn't seem as kind of tender, I guess, as the freshly ground beef. The meat is just a little bit more dense compared to the fresh ground. If somebody just served me this burger, I would really like it. I mean, it's a tasty burger, but the burger made with the homemade ground is it just feels more fresh. Plus, the texture on this is much better than the store-bought one, which is kind of weird because I would expect them to be kind of similar since it's kind of ground beef that we shaped into the patties. But it's just a much better mouthfeel, and you can definitely taste the beefiness on the fresh one. That's a really good burger. But you know what? I'm going to do one more test. So I've got 2 patties left, just the patties with the cheese, no toppings, no buns. So let's just try these out and compare. Okay, let's try the fresh patty with the cheese. You can definitely taste the beefy flavor a lot more. It's almost kind of like a steak taste to it, but just kind of ground up. And now the store-bought ground. I mean, it's beefy too, but it's a much more subtle kind of beefy flavor compared to the fresh ground. And again, that's probably because all of the cuts that we use, that brisket, the sirloin, those have that really strong, intense beefy flavor, whereas the store-bought ground was just ground chuck. So is it worth it? Is it worth the time and effort to grind your own beef to make these burgers? I say yes. You know, grinding it yourself gives you that extra flexibility of mixing the different cuts. The store-bought one is just usually one cut, like in this case was the chuck. One other thing to note is on the grinder itself. So I was using that big machine from Meat, and I got that one because I'm planning on doing more sausage content and learning how to do sausage. But you know, if you're not planning on grinding a whole lot of meat, you can get an attachment for your KitchenAid mixer if you have one of those. You can buy a kind of hand grinder on Amazon. There's a bunch of different things you can get without spending a whole lot of money. And you know, the grinding process itself was pretty easy. Just kind of cube up the meat, throw it in the freezer for a little bit so it firms up, and just run it through the grinder. We put all that leftover ground beef into bags, put that in our freezer so we have kind of meat ready to go. But yeah, it's definitely worth it. I mean, it takes a little bit extra time, and it was 100% worth making these burgers. So that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys like what I'm doing, if you like this style of video, leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you next time. That was good.